Crimson Peak. Title card. I first saw Crimson Peak in 2015 when it first came out because I'm a pretty big fan of Guillermo del Toro. I love his Sexy Fishman and also Hellboy. So Crimson Peak is a film about Edith, a young author in 1901 who is trying to write and publish ghost stories. Unfortunately, she's a woman in the early 1900s, and writing, that was a no-no. So she brings it to a publisher that her dad knows, because her dad is a big important man in business, and he's like, where's the romance? Where's that raunchy shit? And she's like, I don't want to write no dang romance. I want to write my dang ghost stories. Which all stems from her seeing her mother as a ghost after dying of, what was that? Black something. Her mom died of black cholera. Edith can see ghosts, and that is established early on in the film and continues on later as we get deeper into the film. Crimson Peak is all about Edith as a young woman trying to live her best life. And of course, she is living with her single dad who is trying to take care of her, and she's trying to take care of him until a mysterious stranger comes to town. And he's trying to sell his business, his machine that scoops clay out of the ground. I don't know. Brilliant. Genius. Thank you, Tom Hiddleston. The whole idea of this book is that she's writing is sort of a foreshadowing of her life that's about to become her life. And instead of writing the romance, she starts to live this romance. So she's swept off her feet by this mysterious guy. This is he's, from England, so he's got that accent, that chef's kiss.
Can you just shut the fuck up for 30 seconds?
And of course, he has a spooky sister. And there's where we really get into the metaphor and the storytelling in this piece. I love the sister's character. The sister is named Lucille, and Tom Hiddleston is Thomas. By the way, before I forget names, as I am known to do. Now, I think the screenplay, which is written by Guillermo as well, is a little lackluster in parts, but I'm going to get more into that. I just think the story is a bit simple-minded and the metaphors are kind of heavy-handed, but again, we'll get there. First, I want to start with the colors, because the colors of this movie are just incredible. And obviously, what's going to be the most important color in a film called Crimson Peak is red. So the first time we meet Lucille is in the ballroom scene when Thomas convinces Edith to go to this ball after her dad and Alan, the guy who has a big crush on her, have both failed in doing so. And when we go into this scene, all the women are wearing these tans and peaches and these gentle, slight colors. They don't stand out. Even Edith is blending in with this crowd. But Lucille, who is sitting at the piano, is playing the music for everyone to dance to, and she is wearing this big, bright red dress. That dress perfectly encapsulates her character. Not only is she the brightest, most important thing in the room, but she is the most dangerous person there. And later we're gonna find out why. But this red color keeps showing up. So after all the wooing takes place and Edith decides to marry Thomas and they move back to Cumbria, England, they go into this big manor, and the whole thing with this manor is that there is this red clay that is all around it. It's sinking the home, it's dripping from the walls, which doesn't really make sense because how did it get up there? Is it in the ceiling? Did you put it up? Are you storing this clay in your ceiling? But this red just keeps showing up, and it represents so many different things. When it first is there, you see it under the floorboards and you see it on the walls and you're like, okay, this is creepy. And it kind of looks like blood trickling down the walls, which is a foreshadowing to the death that has occurred in this house, which is just so good. And then later becomes important when it snows and the clay is sort of coming up where your footprints are, or where like the snow has been stained by it, and that's where it gets this hill gets the name Crimson Peak. And then it shows up again, this red color, not the clay. This red shows up in this really cool scene. Actually, I think there's like 3 of them, where Edith wakes up because she can't sleep, and the whole home is in darkness, but it's not like a black darkness. It's this green, and it's this dark, like spooky kind of glow of green. And I love those scenes because it's so alien feeling. It's like this, Edith is clearly out of place. She's confused and lost and doesn't know where she is, and this green sort of is surrounding her. And then there's like, in the background, there's this red light, and her light is more of an orange. So the orange is kind of like a guiding light, where she's kind of making her way through the home and she's learning. And that's sort of like the curiosity. That's where she finds the tape recordings of the previous wives. Spoilers, by the way. I'll explain the wives in a little bit. But so she finds the tape recordings, and she's starting to find these clues that she's not the first wife. She's not the first person in this home, the first like foreign person in this home. And so the red light in the background is kind of like, there's more to find in the house. There's more secrets, and she hasn't quite found them yet. So I just really like the way they do the green and the red lights and the contrast. It's spooky. Ooh. And then more on the topic of color, I want to kind of finish this out with this dress that Edith wears. She has this big, bright yellow dress, and I think it's the coolest dress in the whole movie. It has this big black bow on the back, and it sort of drapes down her, and the front has like these buttons. And I see this yellow sort of as her curiosity, because when she wears it, not the first time we see her wear it, but like when she's wearing it is her first time with an intimate encounter with Thomas. They probably would have got it on if not for Lucille busting in with her tea tray. So she's wearing that yellow dress then, and then she's also wearing it later on when she goes down to the basement for the first time and finds the tubs of clay and finds this suitcase that belonged to another woman. So this yellow and these oranges are sort of her curiosity and discovery. And the red in the background is sort of like that final truth that she's trying to find. And I think these different shades of the yellows and reds, yellows to orange to red, is sort of her moving through her discovery and finally finding out the truth. And I love the use of color in this film. It's so great. And speaking on Edith's dress, and then also on Lucille's first red dress, I think the clothing in this film is so well thought out. I think it was so well done. I love looking at the outfits. First off, like, they're just aesthetically fun to look at, but also helps with the movement, like literally the movement in the film, especially at the very end. Big spoiler. Lucille is chasing Edith around the mansion, and she's sort of unkempt looking, like her hair is down and her top is falling off her shoulder, and she's wearing this like shawl, and it's literally billowing behind her as she's running, and it's sort of crazed, and like this lunatic is running through the home, and like she's very ghostly in that moment, which is very interesting because the whole film is about ghosts, like they're literal ghosts, but in that moment she is sort of this haunting banshee running through the home with her billowing clothes, and like there's also Edith, who her nightgown is much more proper than Lucille's. It covers all the way up. It's all the way up to her neck, and she's got these big puffy shoulders, which is a very classic kind of, I don't know, Victorian, maybe Gothic feel. I just, it's very old-timey, and the white is obviously sort of like Edith's purity. Like she's not anything like Lucille. Lucille is out of her mind and is doing terrible things and has done terrible things, and Edith is very pure and naive and childlike, which is actually something that Lucille says she calls Edith a child early on in the film when she's asking Thomas if he's sure about her, like bringing her home to do their nasty plans with. So I love that white gown, especially at the very end when she has to hit Lucille in the face with a shovel, and she also has a cut on her cheek, so she's like got blood all over this gown, and it sort of shows the way she has transformed and how like violence has touched her, and the way she is no longer this child. Like she is not a woman in like the classic terms of, oh, this is just a coming of age story. No, she has like been forced into this violent adulthood, and I love the way that is done with like the red on white, especially with the snow. You know, the snow is also a metaphor for the way that Edith is violently pushed into this maturity with the red on the white. And then another moment with the clothing is when we see Edith's dad get murdered in the beginning of the film, and they only show the murderer from behind, and they are wearing all black. I believe they were wearing pants, but it's a very quick scene, so you can't really tell what they're wearing. And it's definitely meant to make you think that it was Thomas. Like it's a very masculine figure. The hair is up. Like when I first saw the scene, I thought it was Thomas because it looked like short hair. It's actually just Edith, spoiler, with her hair up in very masculine black clothing. And I like the way they did that because obviously they don't want you to realize that Lucille is the one pulling all the strings. They want you to think throughout most of the film that Thomas is the mischievous one, which we later find out that he's very, I want to say squirrely.
Come on. Oh yeah, got it. Oh yeah, look at this go.
Not brave at all. He's very much being manipulated by Lucille. And we see that more as we get into the house. And the house is such a great metaphor because when we first get there, Edith asks Thomas, like, how big is this house? How many rooms are there? And he's like, I don't know. So this house is sort of like their mysterious history. There's sort of things that have not been fleshed out, things that like, because Lucille and Thomas had lived there their whole lives, and their childhood is sort of a mystery, and this house is sort of like their childhood and the mystery of their past, and like we don't know what happened here, and maybe they don't even know what happened here. And I like that this house is sort of, you never really get a feel for like the floor plan. I mean, you know that there's several floors. You know, there's like the basement is very clear. We know that the basement is like the place of the clay vats, and then we know that at the top of the house is the attic, and sort of everything in between is kind of like up for grabs. You don't really know what's going on in between there, and I really like that. There's also, when you walk in the front of this home, there's a big hole right through the ceiling down to the floor. And to me, this is probably gonna sound wild. To me, this is sort of like the womb of the house. And that was sort of cemented for me later on when we see a ghost floating in that space where the hole is, holding a baby. And I'll explain that in a second. But this hole is sort of like the hole in their past. And it also represents like the things they're trying to erase, but it's also like the thing that's revealing them. So it's sort of like, you know how you say like a pregnant pause? That's sort of what this space in the house is. It's sort of like this space holds all of their secrets. This big hole in the house, and it's going to end them. It's the thing that's going to bring the house down, is this hole. And it's also where Edith is eventually pushed off the banister and she falls and breaks her leg. So that space, you know, the ground where you can press into it and the clay is coming up, and you look up and the snow is coming down, and it's sort of like this place where things meet. So this is like the snow, the purity, and then the clay, the blood, and Edith is smashing down into it, like, and it's just ripping her away from her ignorance. And there again, this idea of this violent maturity, happens in that space. And then we get to the attic, which is a very, very important space. First off, the attic is an allusion to Flowers in the Attic, which you may or may not know. It's a film about some kids that were born to a woman, I believe out of wedlock, and the grandmother believed it was a sin, believed it was wrong, and that these kids essentially didn't exist. So she forced the mother to lock them up in the attic, and just, that's where they were. They would get food and they could live, but they couldn't live. And essentially what happens in that film is that the two growing children, the teenagers, are getting to that point in their lives where they want to discover themselves, and some things happen and it's yucky. So that is definitely an illusion that's happening here, because Lucille mentions that their mother was this horrible woman and would lock them away in the attic, and their father was abusive, and so essentially they just spent their lives in this attic together, and it was just Thomas and Lucille. So obviously what the film is getting at is that things happened, and they're very emotionally and mentally abused and stunted, and you know, Lucille decided to handle that by violence, and she decides that Thomas is not only her brother but the love of her life, and she would do anything to protect him and give him a good life. And what that means to her is convincing women to marry Thomas and then murdering them for their money, and that just makes sense to Lucille, and you know, Lucille's gonna do Lucille. But this is also the space where we go back to Edith in the yellow dress. She goes up to the attic for the first time, and Thomas is up there in what is now like his tinker area, you know, like he makes toys, and he says he used to make them for Lucille, and now he's like showing it to Edith. This is the first time in the film that we see him like so legitimately and genuinely happy and excited, and he's like, look at the things I can make, and it's actually really cute because we actually find out, you know, as we go through the movie, you know, you realize what they had been doing to these other women, and realizing that like Edith is in trouble, but you also realize that Thomas is still very innocent himself, and he like is being manipulated and trapped by his sister, and is actually falling in love with Edith, but is terrified. He's falling in love with Edith, but he's terrified to do so because he doesn't know what his sister is capable of. And I'm kind of gonna, in a moment, get to, I keep saying this, I'm gonna get back to it, but it's just, I'm trying to go in a sort of, I have a plan. I've got a plan. So yeah, this, when they're both up in the attic, is the first time that they almost get intimate with one another, and Lucille breaks in with the tea, and it sort of reminds you that this is not a normal romance, and this cannot end well, and this cannot go well because of Lucille. So I'm going to stop for a moment with my metaphorical speak and kind of give some more details about the film. Hopefully you've actually seen it and these aren't spoilers for you. So it's hinted at in the beginning that there's something up with Thomas, that there's Edith's dad has found something on Thomas and wants to scare him away, and we don't know what that is until the very end. And essentially what he finds is that Thomas has already been married, and he's been to Spain and London, and I forget the other place, all under the guise of trying to sell his machine. And what he was actually doing is finding women and then seducing them, bringing them back home, and then Lucille would poison them, and they would take all their money, and they would survive off of that money, because obviously neither of them could really function. Lucille went to a boarding school, and Thomas, I forget where they sent him, or no, I think they sent Thomas to the boarding school, and Lucille went to like a school for troubled girls or something. Like, it was clearly like an insane asylum, but they didn't like directly say that. What we find out is at the very end of the film, when Alan, who is the friend of Edith's, who was in love with her, brings all this stuff that he has found, and they realize that Thomas and Lucille's mother was brutally murdered in the house, and the only people in the house were Thomas and Lucille, but they were 12 and 14 at the time, and no one wanted to believe that they could have done it, but had no other choice. And so, you know, we knew that the house had a history of death, but they didn't quite realize how deep that went. So while we're on this topic of bringing all that up, by the time you get to that point in the film, I don't want to say you, but I had already figured all that out. I already knew what was going on, and I felt like that moment was very redundant, especially because, like, Alan hands this newspaper over to Edith, and she's, like, literally reading it, and so it's just saying exactly what you've already found out. And I just wish, like, these screenwriters and directors kind of trusted in their audience to think. I wish they trusted us enough to, or trusted themselves enough even to say, like, okay, my story writing and the visual storytelling is enough, and they figured it out, and they would leave us some space to, like, think about it afterwards. Once you explain it out like that, there's nothing left for us to consider, to think about. Like, it's already out there on the table, and there's nothing left. So that's where I want to come back to the screenplay, which I mentioned earlier, in that it's sort of clunky at times. Especially in the beginning when it's just like a conversation between Edith and her dad. Like, it's just kind of, something about it felt awkward and sort of unnatural. And maybe it's because the actress Mia Wasikowska definitely struggles with an English American accent, and you can tell. And definitely during those first few scenes, there's like moments when she's slipping, especially since like Tom Hiddleston is doing his English accent, or is he English? I'm not gonna look it up, whatever. The point is that like half the cast is doing an English accent and the other half is doing an American accent, and I feel like Mia was struggling a little bit, and you can tell in those earlier scenes. So yeah, I just feel like that beginning was kind of awkward. I mean, it definitely got across what it was trying to say, like Edith is an author and her dad is an accomplished businessman, and she's trying to get her voice out there, but like can't quite do it because she's a woman, so she's trying to pretend to be a man, and then like, you know, that comes across. But I feel like they don't really do anything with that afterwards, you know, like her being an author or a wannabe author, the only purpose it serves is to sort of bring in Thomas, who is like infatuated with her writing, and then it is a foreshadowing to the events of the movie with the romance and the ghosts. And then it later gets burned by Lucille in the fireplace, which I feel is just her trying to destroy the relationship between Edith and Thomas. So really this book that she's trying to write is just her idea of trying to live, and like that's sort of the metaphor happening there. But it also, I wish like they had done more with her being a writer. Maybe she's trying to take note of what's happening in the mansion, or like maybe she's writing letters back home, or just like something to kind of be like she's still a writer. And like it served its purpose in the beginning of the film and at the end of the film, but it doesn't really connect all the way, and I wish they had done more with that. I also really wanted more character development. I don't want to say they're very surface level, because they're not, you know, they have a history and they have personality. I just wish that there was more to them as characters than like one or two things. Like Lucille, crazy sister, kills mom, sort of her personality. And I mean, we get a moment of like her sort of separation anxiety from like being away from her brother and like seeing her brother with another woman. Like we get a little bit of that. But I still kind of wanted more from this character, because like we just see her as child and then as adult, and there's like no development in between. The same thing with Thomas is like he's being manipulated by his sister and wants to be free and experience love, and that's kind of all we get from him. So yeah, I just feel like there could have been more with these characters. I could have felt for them more. And kind of going back to the script, there's this part near the end when Edith walks in on Lucille and Thomas, and it's supposed to be a sex scene, but it's interesting because you can kind of tell that like Thomas is not that into it, and they're both dressed. They're both like completely dressed. It's just like Lucille is like reaching into his pants, like, and kissing on his neck, and you know, it's a little saucy, but it's like not that saucy. And I think it's because they were kind of like, you know, they're messing around with the theme of incest, and that can be very uncomfortable. I'm not entirely sure why they decided to go down that route. I feel like they could have avoided it, but whatever. So anyway, you can definitely tell that like Thomas is not that into it and doesn't really want to be doing it. at least anymore. I mean, maybe like, I don't know how it started, you know, we kind of just get a glimpse at that. And I'm kind of glad they put that in there, like, oh, Thomas is not that into it. Like, this is bad. It's not just incest bad, it's like bad. What was I talking about? How did I get here? Oh, I was talking about the script of the final scene, because as Edith is like storming out and she's like, you guys aren't who I thought you were, and she looks to Lucille and she's like, you're not his sister. And up to this point, you're kind of like, oh, maybe she's one of the wives and she's just taking advantage of these other women for their money. And, you know, you kind of don't want to believe it's about incest because, yeah, she's like, that's delightful. I am. And then pushes her over the banister, which I just find really funny. Like, it's, how can you take that seriously? So anyway, I just thought like that was kind of, there's like one-liners in this film. And it's like, I haven't seen, you know, one-liners don't really work. They were a very 90s thing, especially like a little bit later when Lucille and Edith are like fighting to the death. Lucille is like, I won't stop until you kill me or I kill you. And then she says it again. You know, Edith hits her with the shovel and she's like, I heard you the first time. Come on. Come on. It's just lazy writing. Like, it was just funny at that point. And I don't think it was meant to be. I mean, maybe there's like that little bit of comic relief, but it was kind of weird. So yeah, now that we've gotten through all of the big themes and the important characters and the colors and the clothes, let's talk about the ghosts. So we only have a couple of ghosts throughout the film, and obviously they're not the main focus because the real bad guys were the people all along. The first ghost we see is Edith's mom, and she died of black cholera, like I said earlier. So her ghost is all black, and she's got this very skeletal face, and she's like in black clothing because, well, she was probably buried in black clothing because that's funeral. And so obviously the color of black here is just death and disease and also foreboding, because she comes to Edith saying, beware of Crimson Peak. So she's obviously this warning. She's this protective mother figure. Which is very interesting because then we move on to Thomas and Lucille's mom, who was murdered in the bathtub by her own children. So it's a very different dynamic from this family that was very loving and kind to this family that was very violent and maladapted and abusive. So we don't get much of the ghost of Lucille and Thomas's mom. We kind of get glimpses of her in the bathtub, and it's sort of just a foreshadowing of how she died and that she died in the house, but she's not as important a character as the other women, the other wives. So the wives we see all red, and that is to represent that they were buried in the clay, or one of them we see the bones float up in the clay pit in the basement. So we, like that, again, we see that red color of the ghosts, which is not a very common color for ghosts, especially since they're all skeletal, and you can see how like they were poisoned to death. So it's sort of like this sickly, like they were coughing up blood, so now they're sort of covered in this clay and blood. They're covered in the poison of the house. So I just, again, with the red colors and the way they do the ghost is very interesting. And a lot of them will have this sort of smoky, like billowy thing coming off of somewhere on the body to represent how they died. And I really like that for like the way they represent the ghosts, and especially the one that was in the closet where the voice recordings were, because those were her recordings, and she was trying to get the attention of Edith to find those recordings. And even though the ghosts sort of come up as like these jump scares and they're spooky and we're running away from them, they were actually a warning the whole time. Now the one ghost that really confused me was I don't remember which is which wife is which, but one of them was around when there was a baby. Now when there's a scene where the ghost is like crawling along the floor, and it looked to me like there was an umbilical cord like coming off of her and sliding behind her. And then later we see her floating in the hole of the house with the baby. To me that just shows that like one of the wives got pregnant and they killed the baby because, they don't really want it, they just want the money. But when Edith confronts Lucille, she says it was her baby and that none of the other women had sex with Thomas. And she wanted to keep the baby, and the woman that was married to Thomas at the time said that she could save the baby And Lucille says that it came out wrong, which obviously, because it's an incest baby. Now, I don't know if, obviously Lucille's not a trustworthy character. We can't trust everything she says. And maybe we're meant to believe that, like, she just wanted to claim this baby as her own, and it wasn't really her baby. She just wanted to believe that. And maybe that's what they're trying to represent with this woman. Or maybe it really was her baby, and the wife at the time had sort of, like, wanted to save it and sort of claimed it as her baby, so like she was very protective of it. Either way, I was kind of like, I'm not really sure what they're trying to get at with the baby. It kind of felt like a forced thing. I don't know, it's kind of weird. Oh, did I talk about all the things? Did I do it? Have I completed this video about Crimson Peak? So yeah, I think I would give this film, I'm gonna say 3.5. 3.5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoy watching it just because it's such a pretty film, and I really like Guillermo's direction and the way he decides to do things. I think his scripts are kind of, it's hard to say because, like, I adore Pan's Labyrinth. I think that film is incredible, and I'm pretty sure that he directed and wrote that one. Yeah, so he directed and wrote that, but it was in Spanish. So I'm wondering if, like, it's kind of a scenario where, like, you're smarter in your first language kind of thing. I don't want to assume anything about Guillermo or his language ability. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying that I know that Guillermo has the talent and the ability to do something that's truly incredible, and I love the way he does his monsters. They always come out just so interesting and creepy and realistic in a way, because like I said, the real monster was Lucille, but the literal, like, ghost monsters were just so well thought out and metaphorical and interesting and, like, fun to look at, and I just really enjoy the things that Del Toro does. Also, Shoutout at the beginning of this film is in Buffalo, New York, my hometown, baby. So thank you, Guillermo, for giving us some Buffalo love, because we don't see a lot of sheddings. But yeah, I really enjoyed this film. I think it's a lot of fun. I think at times it's a little bit too ham-fisted, it's a little bit too, like, this is the metaphor. But besides that, it's a good movie. It's a fun movie. If you like horror, go check it out. So yeah, thanks for watching this video. If you want more reviews on movies, I am working on it. I do have a previous one on Shutter Island. And I'm working on my next Let's Talk Tropes video about the monstrous feminine, which I briefly considered doing about this movie, but I really want to do about The Descent. So whenever I get around to watching The Descent again, I'll get to it. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and